This is ContactTalkRadio.com. Consciousness in action. And you are taking action into your consciousness by tuning into Contact Talk Radio.
And on TuneIn.com, Ping.fm, and UpSnap Mobile.
Contact Talk Radio.
Long ago, before this day's confusion did begin, throughout the stars did we go wandering. Distance was no barrier, and time it had no hope. Free to come and free to go. Free to come and free to go. Open up the book of stars. Open up the
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Karmic Evolution's Astrologically Speaking. I'm your host, SHERI Horn Hasan of Karmic Evolution Astrology, and I'm coming to you on June 16th, 2022 from Contact Talk Radio. Just a quick reminder that this show aims to bring you the truth about astrology and your soul's karmic evolution. First, before we get into this week's Astro News, you can use my usual housekeeping stuff, which is to tell you that you can listen to this podcast anytime by simply going to my website at karmicevolution.com, clicking on the upper right-hand portion of the banner labeled podcast. From there, you can access the latest show, which stays up on top for at least a week, either live as I'm coming to you right now, or recorded, or you can scroll down and search the archive listings for past shows that you might have missed or ones to which you'd like to listen again. Separately, I'd be thrilled if you would follow me on my Facebook page, which is Karmic Evolution for Your Soul, and I'm also on Instagram, or slowly getting onto Instagram. Yes, I'm old. At Karmic Evolution. So you can check out my posts there. Now, finally, I announced last week, and will do so again now, that I was invited to speak and do a workshop. This is a 4-hour workshop for the Astrological Society of Princeton, of which I've been a long-time member, and whose director I studied with, Ken Negus, years ago. Unfortunately, Ken has crossed over, but wonderful teacher, wonderful organization, as you guys know I've spoken about before. And the topic of my workshop is called "I Can't Get No Karmic Relief, or Can I?" And so this is a workshop for those who want to know how to delineate a chart from the evolutionary astrological perspective, meaning how to discern the true purpose of a soul's journey through this lifetime based on both their early and past life experiences. So in this 4-hour workshop, I'm going to teach you just that, along with how to define the quote unquote soul lessons any particular individual has incarnated or reincarnated in this lifetime to learn, depending on your specific particular beliefs. So the first part of this workshop will illustrate how to read a chart from the evolutionary point of view, meaning through the lens of the nodal structure by sign and house, the nodal ruling planets, and the aspects to and from these ruling planets, and the North Node, and aspects to and from the nodes by other planets, major asteroids that factor into that, individual's charts, and or sensitive chart points, other sensitive points. Now, the second part of this workshop will be devoted to looking at participants' charts to help them better understand their individual hero's journey through this lifetime. So we'll look at what tripped you up, what vexed you or otherwise prevented you, again, either early in this lifetime and or in past lives, from achieving your soul's real goals or its real purpose. In short, what energies created the karma into which you were born into this lifetime, and how can you better understand how such past soul conditioning has become embedded in the psyche? And often when that happens, and it happens to all of us, you know, we all have a different view of our own lives, whether we're happy, unhappy, whether there are areas in our lives in which we excel or we're very successful, and others where we feel behind, or, you know, I guess as an extreme cursed, you know, some people would say I'm cursed. I can do this, but I can't achieve that. And that this past soul conditioning often lies in our unconscious, and it's our unconscious that decides to run the show. So it's basically a way to actually see the split between the ego and the unconscious, because the ego thinks it knows everything and what it's doing, and there's nothing wrong with ego. We need ego. But if the ego is operating completely separate from our past conditioned unconscious responses, we may not move in the direction that we truly want to go. So, you know, the workshop is designed to help us better understand how much of what we call karma was actually created through circumstances beyond our control. I always think of Sophie's Choice, that movie, right? Which child are you going to give up to the Nazis and which one are you going to keep with you? I mean, these are horrific kinds of choices that a soul may have been forced to make in past life, which now might perhaps say, for example, incarnate into this lifetime. We might incarnate with fears about our children and their safety and their welfare that seem irrational, you know, or anxiety. So that's the kind of thing I'm talking about. And just understanding where these things come from can really go a long way towards helping us move towards our future. So the workshop is going to focus on how we can decide to make different choices as we move forward into our future, ones that are not based on solely on habitual karmic soul patterns, but rather on creating new future karma through conscious choice-based astrological insight. So if you'd like to join me for this enlightening introduction to evolutionary astrology and take a journey towards greater soul consciousness, designed to ensure a happier, more successful future, one in alignment with your soul's greater true purpose, please email me. Well, actually, first, if you'd like to sign up and you'd like to find out more information, the workshop is from 1 p.m. to 5 p.m. on Saturday, June 25th, so a little less than a week and a half from today. If you're an Astrological Society of Princeton member, it's $30. And if you're a non-member, it's $50. Now, you may remember I told you last week that it only costs $35 a year to join the ASP, which is known as, which has wonderful, wonderful speakers, including I love Rob Hands. So you guys heard me quote him many times in the past, and I've had readings by him, and I've gone to almost every presentation he's ever had, both live and since we switched to Zoom. But there are many, many others. And so they have a roster that includes speakers all year long from October through June. And you can check that out. And you can also find out more information about my workshop and how to sign up at aspnj.com. Again, that's ASP for Astrological Society of Princeton, NJ for New Jersey, aspnj.org. They're a nonprofit, so they go under org, not under com. And if you decide to sign up and you'd like me to take a look at your individual chart as part of the second part of the workshop, I'd be happy to do so. Please email your chart data to me at SHERI, SHERI, at karmicevolution.com. And then again, finally, I'm offering still my 1-hour discounted Karmic Evolution Natal Insight reading to listeners only for $99. And that's for those of you who are interested in astrology. Maybe you've been studying it for a long time. Maybe you're new to it. Doesn't really matter. But, you know, it's still difficult. We all have difficulty being objective enough to look at our own charts. We may develop an expertise in looking at other people's charts, but it's always nice to have a second point of view that is, doesn't run along those subjective lines. So again, if you're interested in astrology and you want to learn more about the true meaning of your individual birth chart or your natal horoscope, please send me an email at SHERI@karmicevolution.com. Again, that's SHERI. This reading is for people who would like to learn more about their individual soul's true purpose, what tripped up the soul in past lives, very much in alignment with the workshop I'm giving, and how to move towards your highest destiny in this lifetime. Move away from the South Node and towards the North Node. It will also, a karmic evolution natal insight reading is going to be able to identify patterns of behavior specifically related to your soul that originated in early life or past lives that affect your current, the major areas that people always want to know about, talk about, fix, correct, change, advance in or whatever, relationships, careers, finances, and health, right? So we may have certain patterns of behavior that are not based on our ego's logical assimilation or assumption of the world around us and what it means that we should be striving for, but again, run unconsciously as part of the things that we're not aware or conscious of that happen to us, like making Sophie's choice as one very extreme example, right? And so insights into what, again, tripped you up in the past and how to take a look at and entertain new perspectives so we can gain greater awareness through astrological insight that brings greater happiness and satisfaction into your life. So again, all this is easy when you take advantage of my 1-hour discounted karmic evolution natal insight reading. And this is for listeners only. It is $99. And I just said to email me, but I forgot that I have a VA now who actually put it up on my website. So you can go to karmicevolution.com/karmic99. And you'll be able to simply, you can pay for it that way. If you have any questions, you certainly feel free to email me again at SHERI@karmicevolution.com. All right. So let's get on to this week's Astro news you can use. So we're 2 days past the June 14th Sagittarius full moon, and the monthly lunar cycle's waning now. It's asking us still to release any attachment to random, superficial bits and pieces of information that don't actually add up to actual factual truth. And as I noted last week, I had said when the Sagittarius full moon arrives at 23 degrees, 25 minutes at 4:52 a.m. Pacific and 7:52 a.m. Eastern on June 14th, it asks the Gemini Sun to release any tendency to remain mired in superficial, disconnected information, and instead to expand its mind toward better understanding the bigger picture. So if we had planted seeds at the May 30th Gemini new moon that allowed us to listen, to learn, and to understand, we may now release any meaningless chatter that clouds our ability to think straight. However, the Sag moon asks us to expand our consciousness even further by grasping the greater symbolic meaning inherent in all that we do hear and see happening around us now. However, we have some energies that just culminated this morning that were kind of dichotomous in nature. And so just 2 days after this lunation, these energies were waxing at the lunation. But if you've been feeling tired, weary, fatigued, unmotivated, or like, who knows, who cares, why bother, sleeping a lot, withdrawing a bit, just kind of feeling inadequate or not really up to the task, but at the same time, kind of conscious of your duties and obligations. It's sort of like there's been this weird schism between like getting stuff done because we know that we have to, because we must be responsible, but at the same time checking out. So it's this weird thing, right? Now, earlier this morning, the Gemini Sun trine Saturn in Aquarius, which again was in play, at the lunation 2 days ago. And that gifted us with the mental discipline, dedication, and thoroughness necessary to channel our energies into any goal that we want to achieve now or wanted to achieve, right? And remember, once things perfect, they tend to wane and dissipate. But as Michael Luton would say, it's not the aspects that matter as much as what we do with them or what we do as a result of them. So, even though technically they kind of fade away pretty quickly, especially the faster moving ones with the moon and the sun and Venus and Mercury and stuff like that, but they can still trigger things. So in short, the Sun trine Saturn aspect brings us or brought us into closer contact with a deeper knowledge about who we are and what we do. There's a sort of concrete feeling here. However, we experienced also, and this perfected earlier this morning, and a few hours later, the Sun perfected its exact square to Neptune in Pisces. And again, these energies were in play as they were waxing at the lunation 2 days ago. And that's the part that may have caused us to feel lethargic, depressed, or generally a bit demoralized, or maybe hopeless about our future. It can also have resulted in some confusion, distortion around information, dis and misinformation. I mean, the Sun's in Gemini, and was, the Sun's in Gemini, which we know, but Mercury, which rules Gemini, also re-entered the sign of Gemini since its recent retrograde period from May 10th to June 3rd. And he just is, he went back into Gemini on June 13th. Let's just put it that way, moving direct, right? So we know that, there's stuff when the Gemini Sun trines, when the Gemini, I got to tell you, my mind I took care of a whole bunch of stuff yesterday, and today I am out to lunch mentally. So forgive me for my missteps if I misspeak or whatever. And hopefully I will quickly recover and correct what I'm saying. But, cut me a little slack today, okay? In all honesty, I love talking. I love doing the shows. But today I was kind of like, oh my, I didn't do that yet. Oh my, I still have to do this. Oh no, when was I going to do that? Oh, I better hurry up, So I'm a tiny little bit out of it. Anyway, thank you for listening to that. So we had, just to recap, Gemini Sun trine Saturn. Good time to get in touch with who we are and what we're really doing now. Gemini Sun square Neptune. Where are my glasses? Oh, they're on my head. Okay. And a kind of general feeling of lethargy, as I discussed, but also, given what's going on in the greater macrocosm, Sun square Gemini is, did you tell me something that is true or something that's not true? That sounds really weird. Oh, but I trust you, so I guess it's correct. Okay, so, the disinformation, misinformation is still pretty rampant right now. And what I was saying is that Mercury re-entered Gemini on June 13th. And so, again, this is a confirmation just that everybody's chattering about this stuff, right? So I think that we can relate to these somewhat conflicting energies, Sun trine Saturn, Sun square Neptune, at least through the collective and at least here in the U.S., by noting that the January 6th committee had planned its televised hearing, its third hearing, right, for yesterday, June 15th, but it was postponed. And that was reportedly due to having to finish putting together its video presentation. Now, Neptune, remember, Sun square Neptune, has to do with visuals. So film or visions, visuals, dreams, fantasy. So film, photography, painting, etc., fine art. If we look at it that way, and also dance, That's a very big, something that's very much correlated with Neptune and music. But if we look at it that way, right, the Sun trine Saturn kept its overall big picture focus. As I said, I did a bunch of stuff yesterday, got it done, but its goal was temporarily delayed, but only slightly, so that they could ensure greater clarity when they resumed their presentation. And I had to laugh when I was writing this because I was like, maybe this is the energy I was realizing as I was thinking this, that maybe this energy is why I went to the bank yesterday to deposit a check, but wrote out the wrong deposit slip, one for another bank. And, it wasn't until the teller said, oh, we have a little problem. And I went, what? And then when he pointed it out to me, instead of getting the right deposit slip, I started writing a check from a different account, a different bank. I have 2 accounts or whatever. So anyway, I just was like, oh my God. Anyway, if it's been happening to you, don't worry about it. It's totally normal. And if you've been sleeping a lot, a little bit depressed, like I said, take heart because, we focus on stuff and then we kind of go, okay, now it's time for a nap. Anyway, needless to say, the sun moves fast. And so these energies, again, are more fleeting. Now, coming up on June 18th, Venus and Taurus will square Saturn and Aquarius, indicating that we'll all be reevaluating our relationships between now and then with an eye towards what I call the what have you done for me lately energy, which is to say an assessment of whether we're getting as good as we give or vice versa. I mean, I always like to present two scenarios. One is, am I giving more than I'm getting, or am I getting more than I'm giving, which is true in some relationships, right? So this reevaluation of existing partnerships comes after June 11th, which was last Saturday, Venus-Uranus conjunction in Taurus. And that signified a potential shift in values, something rapid, something that changed rapidly. So what does that mean? It means that if we choose to look at it from the admittedly more myopic lens of the U.S. only, that people gained a more coherent understanding of what actually led up to the January 6th Capitol riot and what kind of planning went into it, rather than it having simply been a spontaneous, of the moment instigated event. Excuse me. And this in turn shifted some of the public's knowledge towards learning that, for example, when the mob was sent by then President Trump from the ellipse to the Capitol, which was a ways away, that the Proud Boys, the militia group that wants to overthrow the government, had been at the Capitol building itself from earlier that morning, preparing to breach the Capitol. So Trump began his speech at noon that day, and according to Wikipedia, finished it at 1:10 p.m. And at the conclusion of his speech, and I would just want to point out, Wikipedia is, they've become more reliable. I never used to trust them earlier years, but it just depends. So if you can correlate that with other sources, you're okay. But it does have an entire timeline of the events of not only that day, but from September 29th, which is when Trump told the Proud Boys to stand back and stand by. So it's interesting to look at that timeline that's set down in print. In any case, he finished at 1:10, but the Proud Boys had gone to the Capitol building itself, according to this documentary filmmaker who was basically embedded with them. They had made their way to the Capitol starting at about 10:30 a.m., which was a good hour and a half before Trump even started speaking. So the implication is that they were already scoping out the joint, casing the joint, looking for placing themselves at the different entrances on the west and the east, et cetera, et cetera. And when Trump, addressed the crowd at the end of his speech at the ellipse, he encouraged the crowd to march to the Capitol by saying, and I quote, "If you don't fight like hell, you're not going to have a country anymore. We're going to try and give them," meaning the Republicans, "the kind of pride and boldness that they need to take back our country." Now, of course, these groups like the Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers, that's exactly what they wanted to hear. So, but by 12:53 p.m. that day, according to Wikipedia, rioters from the ellipse joined the Proud Boys and some of the Oath Keepers who were already present at the Capitol, and who then began to break through the barriers that were being guarded by the Capitol Police and to engage in hand-to-hand combat, which, resulted in several deaths. Okay, so now back to Venus-Uranus on June 11th and the upcoming Venus-Saturn square on June 18th. A lot of the information presented in the January 6th hearings has not been new. So a lot of that hasn't been, a lot of what was presented, that's factual, wasn't a hugely big deal, especially to us ninth house or Sagittarian suns. Some of us follow the news far more closely than others, and that is definitely not a judgmental statement. We are busy, we have lives, we have children, we have older parents, we have relatives who have problems. We ourselves have health problems, or are working 2 or 3 jobs or whatever. So don't take that the wrong way, please. But a lot of the information that was presented has been in print or broadcast on cable and regular news channels over the last year and a half. However, what's changed with the advent of these public hearings is that they're weaving together all these disparate bits and pieces of Geminian type information, which in and of themselves might carry little meaning, but meaning also which alternatively might have been exaggerated, such as that of the big lie in and of itself, right? Into a more Sagittarian, meaningful overview of the whole entire reason for the events of January 6th in the first place, which are that a president of the United States claimed that an election he lost fair and square was rigged. In fact, he said the exact same thing in 2016 when he ran against Hillary Clinton, that if he lost, it meant the election was rigged. So nothing new to see here since November of 2020, right? Or actually, November of 2016. However, instead of accepting the legitimate results of November 3rd, 2020, and I know I'm telling you stuff that you know, but bear with me, and that Joe Biden won the election fair and square, Trump has sought to emphasize either bits and pieces of disconnected information. There was ballots coming in garbage cans. We all know now that Rudy Giuliani, if we didn't know this before, and those of us from New York City kind of had a pretty good inkling that Giuliani is often inebriated. Just read Michael Cohen's book if you want more about that. But in any case, that, Trump has sought to emphasize either bits and pieces of disconnected information or simply to lie outright. And given that Trump's lies have been documented over and over again through his public statements by several major media outlets, you really don't have to dig too deep to find us. And they have a number of them, and I've forgotten what that number it is, but it's definitely in tens of thousands at this point. And just looking at the past 6 years since he ran for president in 2016, this should come as no surprise. So the previous Venus-Uranus conjunction may, at this point, as we approach the Venus square Saturn on the 18th, have shocked some people into a different way of thinking. And again, Venus square Saturn is now going to ask us to review our relationship to those who we may have thought of in a particular way previously and now are having second thoughts. So the question it asks us is, have our values been misplaced? And we can extrapolate out from that way beyond the microcosm of what I'm talking about here in terms of the US and the hearings and Trump and all that stuff. Now, the second part is that Venus is often correlated with finance, especially in Taurus, and Uranus in Taurus. Differences in finance. We all know about Bitcoin, and we all have seen, some of the things happening with the market, which I'm going to get into in just a moment. But I just want to say for a moment that one of the things that was revealed that most people or all people did not know at the committee's second hearing, which was earlier this week on June 13th, is how Trump's fundraising efforts after the November 3rd, 2020 election raised nearly $250 million, which sounds like less money when you say 250 million, but it is $250 million that's what Sagittarius would say, under the auspices of indicating that monies raised would be used for his legal defense and court cases to prove his election fraud claims, but that in fact, the money that he and his fundraising efforts collected did nothing of the kind. Instead, the money was funneled into different foundations and entities that ended up going either directly to his family members or to many of his cronies. So this truth revealed may actually cause him more legal grief in the future, because those who may be angry at having discovered this now, that the money that they sent him, particularly I'm thinking larger donors, right? People who submitted $25 or $5 or even $50 or $100 who can afford to lose it may not really care. But there are, I'm sure, some big ticket donors who might be angry enough to seek legal recourse. I'd also point out, it's very interesting, just this morning, I read an article, and now I'm thinking, I think it was in the Washington Post, about how the monies that have been raised for shooting victims, mass shooting victims, Uvalde, Buffalo, and all that came before, said they mentioned El Paso, Texas, and a few other places, that a lot of the fundraisers are nonprofits. Some of them are big nonprofits, and some of them are small nonprofits created specifically for the purpose of raising funds for those who, the relatives of those who either lost their lives or those who were traumatized by the events. But that a large portion of a good deal of that money is not given to the actual survivors. And of course, survivors who were injured and are recovering, as well as those who were traumatized. So, I mean, obviously, if you're injured and recovering, you're traumatized too. But people who witnessed, think of all the children in Uvalde who witnessed their friends dying, you know. So it was interesting because the article said that they had called many of these people who put up their fundraisers, you know, out on the internet or social media, and that they had taken some of these monies, which of course ran into the millions, for administrative costs, or they go to other services they provide for other people. And one of them pointed out that and I used to work for Easter Seals, the affiliate of the National in New Jersey, so I knew this. Most of the money for a nonprofit comes from grants. They may be federal grants, they may be state grants, or they may be municipal grants, but that means that money comes from the government. And the rest is raised through fundraising efforts. And a large portion of those fundraising efforts come from what we used to call the little old lady who writes a $100 check in December so that she can deduct it off of her taxes, but also do something good with it. And that's a very large percent, used to be, I don't know if it still is, I would surmise that it is, but like 75% of a nonprofit's funding that comes from individuals, it's about 75% that does come from these like little old ladies who, you know, people are donating $25 up to $100 or whatever. So, and that every nonprofit discloses in its annual report how it allocates those funds. So you want to know if 93% of your dollar is going to the actual, say, victim in Uvalde's family, for example, it states that, but you have to look that up. So there was a response from one of the nonprofits that raised money for one of these shootings, I don't remember which, that said that it makes clear that like 25% goes not to any of the victims. It goes to social services for others. It goes to, trainings and all kinds of different things. So, or prevention. Now, that's not a bad thing, but it just comes off as being somewhat deceptive. And I only mention it because it was a synchronicity that I saw this article at the same time that I'm putting together my comments for this show and talking about Trump and his fundraising lies. Okay. So Sun square Neptune, not everything, not all that glitters is gold, not everything that that we see is as it appears. And, in the terms of Neptune representing charity, right? Being charitable, being empathic for others and wanting to make their pains go away, and the Sun squaring it, it's like we want to do something good, but we don't want to get deceived either into doing it or into how what we've done, especially if it's financial, is going to be misused or not used in the way that we thought it was going to be. That's the rose-colored glasses aspect to this, right? So now I just want to talk about the fact that, we can't ignore for this week's Astro news you can use, which is that the stock market's taken a tumble big time since last Friday, June 10th, and that we're technically in what Wall Street calls bear territory, which is defined as a 20% decline in the stock market. So that includes today, again, I just looked before I came on air, a 7% drop after yesterday's slight recovery. I think it was 1.2% up yesterday. I may not be 100% right, but it was it was a small amount after having fallen big time the day before. So the year to date, the market's down 22.6%, according to the Reuters news outlet, which is a respectable one. Now, I'm just going to say this because, again, the Sun just finished squaring Neptune, and I'm just kind of winging it a little here. Many of us, and those of you listening, may have investments in individual stocks, some not. Many of us likely have a 401k and or an IRA or IRAs from our current or previous places of employment. And I just wanted to share with you something interesting because I've been channeling my mother lately, who was a huge fan of Susie Orman. And I've been listening to Susie Orman's podcast for the last couple of weeks. And so I just wanted to share some because she's very sensible. And one of the things that she says, and this is why I'm sharing this, because Venus is going to square Saturn after the shock of Venus-Uranus, which includes the following, or the June 10th, right? And Venus conjoined Uranus on the 11th. So you can see cause and effect that the market fell very big. But I'm going to pass along to you what Susie Orman says, which is don't cash out. I do not give financial advice, so please don't misunderstand me. But she said something that made a lot of sense to me. She said, because of the high inflation, and that's become really apparent since April 12th's Jupiter, Neptune, and Pisces conjunction, that because of the rapid rate of inflation, and yesterday the rate of, I think it's the consumer price index, was inflation was higher. Okay. It hasn't been this rate since 94, I think they said. But in any case, that if you invest or have invested money, especially if you're young enough not to need it right now, that the best thing to do is let it ride, because the market will recover. It's just a matter of how long it takes to do so. And the only thing that almost every financial advisor, because I've read a lot of articles about this lately too, is saying, as is Susie Orman, is that we should put aside an emergency fund, meaning cash, or funds that we can liquidate quickly for the next year. I think it was the Times had somebody, or the Post again, that said 6 months. 6 months if you're working, drawing a salary, not desperate for money or whatever. But Susie Orman, and the reason I say I'm channeling my mother too, is not just because she listened to her, but she followed her advice. And I would say she did that for 40 years or so, since Susie Orman probably started out, which was about 40 years ago. My mom passed in 2015, so 35 years of Susie Orman. Very sensible, very practical, very down to earth, not a lot of BS, you know. There's only one caveat I would make, which is that I noticed that she was recommending individual stocks for gas companies and for big pharma. So if anyone has a conscience, they don't want to do that, or they might not want to do that. I know I don't, but in any case. All right. So I'm babbling, as I said, that I might do because of my lack of concentration today. But the point is that my mother listened to Susie Orman, and she died with a lot of money. Okay. So she used her advice wisely. But in any case, that Susie Orman also says, look, redo your budget, because things have changed so drastically, even in the last 6 months or so, with the rise of inflation. So because goods cost so much more than they used to, whatever you budgeted for even 6 months or 12 months ago is not going to cover it. So to take the time to redo the budget in alignment with today's actual prices. All right, so I'm off my soapbox now. I also want to tell everyone, and in doing so interrupt some of my remarks, but maybe thankfully so for some of you, that I just got an email from my friend Mitchell Lewis, who some of you may know from his having been on the show. I just invited him to come on next week, which I'm hoping he can do. I haven't heard back from him yet. That he's doing a Zoom webinar. And that webinar, ironically, is at the exact same date and time of my workshop, which is June 25th of, a week and a half from now at 1 p.m. Eastern and 10 a.m. Pacific. And I'm just going to read you. It says, topic, financial astrology webinar. This will be a comprehensive analysis and predictions for the stock market, currencies, oil, gold, housing, cryptocurrencies, etc. And it'll be a 2-hour PowerPoint webinar with Q&A. And his topics will include, will inflation continue? Is there a recession coming? Will there be a stock crash or a recovery? What is the future of cryptocurrencies, which took a big hit also in this past week? Will oil continue to go up, or will it settle down? Is the housing bubble over, or will it resurge? How will interest rates affect housing? Some of us know that the, I think actually I misspoke. I think that the inflation was high in 2007 or 8, but that the interest rates that the Fed raised by 3/4 of a point yesterday is the largest one since 94. Anyway, how will interest rates affect housing? Mortgages, obviously. Predictions about the pandemic, war, and midterm elections, and how will they affect the markets? And what stock sectors look good, and where can I safely invest my money? So you guys can go to, just go to mitchlewis.com. Mitchell Lewis, I know he's Astro Mitch at AOL.com. And just, Google or whatever. I have a whole Zoom thing to register in advance, but I can't tell what that is. And I did this at the last minute. So again, a little fuzzy headed. So forgive me. But if you're interested now, my workshop will be recorded. His presentation will be recorded. So I learned long ago that I learned the word co-opetition, which I so prefer to competition. So he and I are not in competition. And if you'd like to hear both of them, you can always go to one live and listen to the recording for the other one, or vice versa. So the fee for his is $40. And again, it's June 25th, which is Saturday of next week, a week from this Saturday at 1 p.m. All right. So just to get back to the basics, since Mars joined Chiron in Aries yesterday, which was June 15th, I think it will spark the kind of actions that will, based on the Venus-Uranus stuff, simply shift allegiances, right? Again, in connection with the money, right? Those who were defrauded may decide to speak out and voice their woundedness around previously believing intentionally misleading information. You know how mad you get when someone lies to you, whether it's your child, whether it's your lover, whether it's your best friend, or your boss or your colleagues or whatever. It's like, most of us would get at least a little ticked off, right? So again, Venus square Neptune on June 18th may well bring about that Venus-Uranus, wow, you won't believe what I just learned about so-and-so kind of information that predisposes some of us to reevaluate who and what we believe in the future based on hurtful or detrimental lies we heard and believed in the past. Now, Venus sextiles Neptune June 18th too, and this may cause us simply to want to relax, enjoy nature, dream, listen to music, create something beautiful now. Fantasy can trump reality now, but in a much more positive way because it's a sextile. Sextiles are always opportunities than the way it was, now with the Sun squared Neptune. So allowing ourselves to dream can also allow us the ability to tap into the collective. And that means we can have greater empathy and compassion for others now. Maybe like the Ukrainians who are still fighting off Russian aggression and dying at higher rates than earlier in the war. I saw something again this morning that said up to 500 Ukrainian fighters are dying daily. 2 Americans are reportedly missing, and they don't know if they were captured or killed. So the Venus sextile to Neptune in 2 days, we all need a mental and emotional break now and then. So it's a good time to recognize, in conjunction with the Venus Saturn stuff, who deserves our partnership and who doesn't, while also being able to feel for and empathize with those in the former category. You deserve to be in partnership with me, so I'm going to give you all I got, and I'm going to care for you, and I'm going to nurture you, and I'm going to empathize with your pain. And I'm thinking that's why I can't being more personal today. See, I don't have boundaries. Sun square Neptune, no boundaries. I know I sound like I've been drinking, but I haven't. I swear I had a nectarine before I got on the show. It's just a goofy kind of day. Can you tell? Anyway, as I was writing this or, thinking about what I was going to say, I was like, Sun square Neptune, I was while the energy was waxing yesterday, that's why I bought flowers and a card for my neighbor's birthday yesterday. Now, something moved me to do that, even though we don't usually exchange gifts or cards or anything, and never did in the past. I just had a birthday in April and she didn't get me anything or whatever, and I didn't expect it. But after my trip to the bank, where the Sun Neptune square had me confusedly trying to use the wrong deposit slip and then make out a second check that was on the wrong account, I ran to Wegmans, the grocery store here, to pick up a few groceries and kill 2 birds with 1 stone. And I got a nice bouquet of flowers and a birthday card there. And I have to say that I was quite gratified because I knew it would make my friend very happy. She has had some disappointments in her life recently. And it turned out that she had gotten, after some checkups, she recently broke part of her foot and sprained her ankle. I don't know. Anyway, she's in a boot. So needless to say, she was really, really happy. She had also gotten some good medical feedback. So everything was cool. So it all worked out. Anyway, back to the issues at hand. Somewhere between June 18th and 19th, Mercury, which is now direct in Gemini, reaches its shadow point, or the degree at which it originally stationed retrograde on May 10th, which was 4 degrees and 51 minutes of Gemini. So since the Gemini Sun also quincunxes, or makes a 150-degree aspect to Pluto and Capricorn later on June 19th, I think it's safe to say that we all reviewed during Mercury's retrograde period from May 10th to June 3rd. We've reviewed stuff, whatever that is, and it's now been assimilated, and we're ready not only to put it into action, which we may already have done, but to truly better understand things. And I relate that also to the January 6th hearings. you begin to understand how we astrologers often say jokingly to each other, oh boy, you can't make this stuff up. When you realize how, again, as part of the microcosm of the collective, the January 6th Congressional Select Committee has taken thousands of emails and hours of testimony and woven them into a more meaningful truth about which it's attempting to make the rest of the country and the collective conscious. Now, Saturn's still in Aquarius, which I've mentioned numerous times. He's still he's still squaring the transiting karmic nodal axis, Scorpio South Node, Taurus North Node. So the committee knows it's not going to change the mind of any ideologues. You know, people like Stuart Rhodes, who's the head of the Oath Keepers militia, which entered the Capitol that day in formation and in full military gear, intent on stopping the certification of the electoral process. And Stuart Rhodes, by the way, has a Yale law degree. Okay, so we're not talking about someone who's too stupid to understand certain things. However, it's the smaller number of independents and young people this committee is trying to impress, along with the Attorney General Merrick Garland and the prosecutors at the Department of Justice, who've indicated already that they are listening intently. So Mercury in Gemini sextiles Jupiter in Aries for the second time since May 19th, when he was retrograde, which is, of course, also the day before the Sun entered Gemini on June 20th. And when, you know, since that happened, we may have considered the larger issues. This is sort of the culmination of the review period. Mercury in Gemini sextiles Jupiter in Aries May 19th during Mercury retrograde. And at that time, we may have considered the larger issues affecting our lives and reviewed our plans for the future. Now that Mercury's direct and reached its shadow point, this aspect may well prove that we've gained a better understanding of the overall patterns of our lives and are clear about how to proceed into the future. Clarity around knowing what we want out of life, regardless of what stage we're at, certainly helps direct our actions in meaningful ways and can make us more confident in the choices that we make going forward. Now, the opportunities to do so can lead to, certain reforms, because on June 19th, also, the Sun quincunxes Pluto. And that's the 150-degree aspect that I mentioned. And it asks us to adjust our conversation, Suns in Gemini, toward making necessary changes, transformations, Pluto, to bring about true societal and personal reform. In light of both Mercury's reaching its shadow point degree and this quincunx, I'd like to point out, that this is part and parcel of what's behind the gun legislation that's being proposed in the Senate, and other things like that, and the letting go of other information that's not going to be important in our efforts to make these reforms. Now, just before airtime too, I noticed that, the third hearing was today. I didn't listen to any of it yet. I have it taped. I'm the 9th house sun. But I saw that there was this debate amongst the January 6th committee members about whether or not they were going to call Ginny Thomas, Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas's wife, in for an interview, and that whether they would use any of her emails and texts as part of their hearings, and they have decided to do so. So originally they had decided it was off the point, but now apparently, because John Eastman, the lawyer for Trump, was forced by the courts to release a new trove of his emails and texts, there's more that apparently she was involved in. So anyway, what I mentioned last week about the Sag full moon, lunations call for us to release any BS we've heard and instead weave all the smaller detailed bits of information together into a more meaningful whole by discarding that which doesn't now factor into the bigger picture and its overall meaning, is about reaching a higher state of consciousness. Gemini's archetypal energy can reflect the tendency to become mired in details that don't add up. However, what the waning Sag full moon calls us to do between now and the June 28th Cancer new moon is to expand an understanding of our lives and the role we all play within the larger world. I said last week that we are all human specks in the greater design of the cosmos, and that this Sag full moon reminds us that the Gemini Sun reminds the Gemini Sun that there is a larger cosmos and that we all form part of the overall pattern it creates. And such higher knowledge cannot fail to help us reach a state of greater consciousness now. So thank you, everyone, for joining me today. Thank you for putting up with some of my spaciness and lightheadedness here. And I promise to be back on the ball by next week, when I do hope, I can't promise, but I do hope that Mitchell Lewis joins me and we get greater insight, since we don't know what the market's going to do or inflation's going to do between now and next week, although inflation ain't going anywhere, they say. And as to his question for a recession, what I'm seeing is that everybody, including major corporations, are expecting the recession by the end of the year or early next year. I highly recommend Susie Ormond for those of you who don't know her and just want some practical advice. And she talks to people who are not millionaires and billionaires and have hundreds of thousands of dollars, as well as to those who do. So I find her equal opportunity in that sense. Meanwhile, again, thanks everyone for joining me. I hope you found the information presented here helpful as you continue your karmic evolution in this lifetime. Please be sure to join me next week on June 16th for another episode of Karmic Evolutions, Astrologically Speaking. Till then, may your journey be filled with karmic healing and the joy of greater consciousness. Namaste.
Long ago, before this day's confusion did begin, throughout the stars did we go wandering. Distance was no barrier, and time it had no hope. Free to go